In the official county ledger of Hawthorne, Tennessee, there is a record from 1834 that no one can explain. A young enslaved girl named Annalise, age 12, was declared missing on a storm-struck night in April. What unsettled the town wasn't the disappearance. It was the fact that she had already been reported missing 2 years earlier, and yet she was alive and unchanged when she reappeared. Both times she vanished, the same detail was written in trembling handwriting by different officials. Last seen staring with eyes of 2 colors, one ice blue, one burnt amber, as if looking through a man's soul. Locals called them witch eyes. When her body finally resurfaced in 1841, the sheriff sealed the report. The coroner denied writing what appears on the final line: no signs of decay, temperature of the body colder than the ground, eyes open, pupils responsive. This documentary is the first attempt to unravel what happened in Hawthorne, and why the town's church burned all its records 3 months after Annalise was buried, or supposedly buried, because the grave they marked for her is empty. To understand Annalise's curse, we have to understand the place that tried to erase her. Hawthorne wasn't a town built on prosperity, it was built on fear. Founded in 1806, the settlement was a refuge for families escaping the aftermath of the Second Great Awakening, a revivalist movement that swept the South with sermons about prophecy, possession, and divine punishment. But in Hawthorne, faith twisted into something heavier, something hidden. The town's founders were the Wexford Circle, a group of plantation owners and ministers who believed in a doctrine they called the doctrine of singular souls. They taught that certain children were born with extra sight, able to perceive spiritual corruption. To the Circle, this ability wasn't a gift, it was a threat. The Circle controlled every aspect of life: the churches, the schools, the orphanages, the sheriff's office. Their rules weren't recorded on paper. They were enforced through rumor, shame, and the disappearance of anyone who stepped out of line. When Annalise was born with eyes of 2 colors, the midwife refused to touch her. The plantation owner, Elias Wexford, marked her birth record with a single phrase: "She sees what must not be seen." From her first breath, Hawthorne believed Annalise wasn't a child, she was a warning. And warnings were never allowed to survive. The earliest documented incident with Annalise took place when she was only 4. According to whispered testimony from surviving letters, Annalise was found wandering through the plantation yard in the middle of a thunderstorm, staring up at windows as if she expected someone to fall out of them. No one had opened her cabin door. No one understood how she had left without waking anyone. The overseer claimed he saw her looking at the main house as if counting something. When he approached, she spoke a sentence that shook him so deeply he wrote it in his Bible: "Someone up there isn't supposed to be alive." The house was checked, everyone accounted for, nothing out of place. Or so they claimed. 3 months later, the plantation's head made the one who slept in that very upstairs room drowned herself in the well. No note, no reason, just a quiet, inexplicable unraveling. After her death, Elias Wexford demanded the child be branded a watcher, not a witch, something older, a soul that peers where it has no right. The town took this as doctrine, but Annalise did not speak again for 2 years. Silence for her was safety. The Hawthorne Methodist Chapel looked like every other rural church of the era. Simple wood, tall windows, a scrubbed white altar, but it wasn't a place of prayer, it was a vault. Underneath the floorboards, hidden behind layers of brick and dirt, were the remains of a colonial-era structure. Historians now believe it was a holding chamber, part of an abandoned penitentiary system predating the town itself. No maps reference it, but the builders knew it was there because they used it. The circle met beneath the chapel, performing what they called equalization rituals, ceremonies designed to suppress spiritual abnormalities in children they believed were born with unnatural perception. Most of those children were orphans. A few were enslaved. No one knows exactly what happened inside that underground chamber, but the surviving iron restraints tell their own story. And the scratches on the walls, deep, frantic, uneven, do not come from tools. They come from hands. When Annalise turned 6, she was taken to the chapel for the first time. The entry was recorded in a now destroyed church ledger. She resisted without raising her voice, but her eyes followed every lantern like she could see something behind the flame. That line is the only trace left of what they did to her, but something changed after that day, because the nightmares in Hawthorne began the same week, between 1828 and 1830. Hawthorne experienced what historians later called the 2-year sleep panic, a sudden rise in night terrors, sleepwalking, children screaming at shadows, adults waking with scratches on their arms and no memory of receiving them. What revealed the connection to Annalise was a pattern. All the afflicted over 60 people reported seeing the same dream, a girl with two mismatched eyes staring at them through a crack in the door. In some accounts, the door belonged to a bedroom, in others, a barn. In one case, a schoolhouse that had been abandoned decades earlier. The descriptions were always the same: one blue eye, one amber eye, motionless, waiting. Fear spread faster than reason, and Elias Wexford took advantage of it. He ordered that Annalise be placed under spiritual confinement, a euphemism for being locked in a windowless toolshed on the far edge of the property. For 9 months she was kept inside, no sightings, no incidents, no dreams in the town logs. The nightmares stopped, until the night she disappeared for the first time. When her shack was opened the next morning, not a single board was disturbed, no footprints, no broken locks, just a small circle burned into the dirt floor, and 2 tiny handprints pressed in the center. The townspeople said she had gone back to wherever she came from, but she returned. And that was the problem. Annalise resurfaced 21 months after vanishing. No one saw her arrive. She simply appeared at the edge of the plantation yard at dawn, barefoot, staring at the house like she had never left. Her clothes were the same size, her hair had not grown, her height matched the day she disappeared. She had not aged, but her eyes had changed. The blue was lighter, the amber darker. The sheriff wrote the first official description. The child looks as if she stepped out of a place where time holds its breath. What unsettled him wasn't her health. It was the lack of injury. A 6-year-old could not survive alone in the Tennessee wild. But she had no scratches, no dirt beneath her nails, not even sunburn, as if the world had never touched her. Elias Wexford refused to bring her back into the house. He insisted she be delivered immediately to the church, where a second ritual was attempted. That night, the chapel bell rang continuously from midnight until the townspeople forced their way inside. The circle members were on the ground, not dead, but unconscious, as if struck by the same dream, like paralysis that had tormented the town years earlier. Annalise was gone again, this time for only 2 hours. She was found sitting calmly on the chapel steps at dawn, smiling, not at the people around her, but at something behind them. Over the next year, the plantation workers reported unnerving changes in Annalise. The most whispered story came from a field hand named Clara. She claimed that one afternoon while picking cotton, she saw Annalise standing at the edge of the rows. The sun was overhead. The entire field cast crisp shadows. Except Annalise, there was nothing beneath her feet, just untouched light. Clara fled, convinced the child was a bad omen, but the strangest detail wasn't her missing shadow. It was something Annalise was holding, a silver cross belonging to the plantation's late mistress, a woman who had died a year before Annalise was born. When confronted, Annalise didn't explain. She simply said, "She asked me to return it." No one questioned her after that. But the circle did, and they grew desperate. If Annalise truly saw things that didn't belong to this world or this time, then she was no longer just a threat to their doctrine. She was evidence of a secret they had spent decades burying. Documents recovered from the ruins of the Hawthorne Chapel reveal the circle's real purpose. They weren't simply a religious order. They were custodians of an older belief system, a superstition brought from Europe by the Wexford family centuries earlier. The belief in the echoed child, a being said to be born once every few generations, a child whose eyes split the world, allowing them to see across the divide between life and death, past and future, truth and facade. To anyone else, it was folklore. To the circle, it was proof that corruption, spiritual, ancestral, or otherwise, could be exposed. Annalise, with her mismatched eyes, matched every trait described in the Wexford family's forbidden texts. Texts the circle had vowed to destroy. Her existence threatened their control, and their control was the only thing keeping the townspeople obedient. So they began planning a final ritual, something irreversible. Something that required more than fear. It required silence. Hawthorne's orphanage was a brick building on a hill known for two things: its strict discipline and its unusually high mortality rate. Officially, children died of illness. Unofficially, they died after tests. Survivor letters, brittle, scorched, hidden in floorboards, describe how the circle conducted experiments on children they believed had spiritual deviations. They examined their eyes, measured their reactions to light and sound, forced them into days-long isolation. 2 children were documented as having heterochromia. Both died during rituals meant to equalize their spirits. When Annalise returned from her disappearance unchanged, the circle saw her as the anomaly they had been waiting for. A child who resisted their methods, a child who came back. They needed to know how. So they transferred her to the orphanage under the guise of care. Workers later described the experience of watching her walk through the orphanage doors. She didn't look scared. She looked like she had already been here before. The next 7 weeks were the darkest in Hawthorne's history, and the final days began with the sound of every orphan screaming at once. The event became known as the Screaming Night of 1833. Every child in the orphanage, all 43 of them, woke at the same exact minute. Witnesses reported hearing the sound from half a mile away. The children screamed the same words, "She's standing in the doorway." But when staff ran to check the halls, the doors were empty, no one there. Except for Annalise. She was sitting calmly on her bed, staring at the ceiling, smiling. The children stopped screaming at the same moment she blinked. Not gradually, instantly, like a switch had been thrown. The circle rushed to the orphanage the next morning. They locked Annalise in the basement chamber, determined to force a breakthrough. But that night, the town suffered a blackout. Every lantern blew out at once. Church bells swung on their own, and the river behind the plantation rose without rain. Something was happening, something the circle couldn't control. The next morning the chamber was empty. Annalise had vanished a second time. But this disappearance was different. She wouldn't return alive, at least, not in the way people understood life. 7 years passed before Annalise's body was found. A group of men dredging the river discovered a small figure caught between submerged roots. They assumed it was a recent death, but when they pulled her onto the bank, they realized the clothing was decades old. The girl had not decomposed. Her skin was cold. Her eyes were open. The sheriff, horrified, refused to touch her. He had been there when she returned the first time. He remembered that stare. The coroner's report, later sealed, contained several chilling lines. Body presence as recently deceased. Temperature unnaturally low despite ambient heat. Pupils reactive to lantern light. Reacting pupils implied one thing: consciousness. The townspeople insisted on a burial, but no one would carry the body, so they buried her in a rushed, unmarked grave. 3 months later, the grave was found open. The coffin was intact, the nails undisturbed, but it was empty, and something else was left behind. A single circle burned into the dirt floor of the grave, the same symbol found in her shack years earlier. Whatever Annalise was, she wasn't gone, not completely. In 1842, state investigators arrived in Hawthorne after rumors spread to neighboring counties. By then, dozens of residents had fled. The town was strangely quiet. Too quiet. Investigators questioned the remaining members of the circle, but their answers were fragmented, paranoid, or eerily rehearsed. One minister kept repeating, "She doesn't belong to time, she belongs to sight." Another whispered, "We opened the wrong door." When investigators demanded access to the chapel's basement, circle members refused. 2 days later, the chapel burned to the ground in a fire so hot it melted the iron bell. Every document inside was lost. But investigators noted something peculiar. The fire began underground. Someone had tried to erase something, or bury it deeper. After 2 weeks, the investigation was closed with a fabricated conclusion of structural collapse and mass hysteria. But witnesses later admitted something chilling. Every investigator left town pale, trembling, and refusing to speak of what they saw beneath the chapel. Some resigned within months. One died by suicide. None returned to Hawthorne. After Annalise's disappearance, the town fractured. Families left, the circle dissolved, but the fear lingered. Over the next 50 years, descendants of Hawthorne reported recurring symptoms: night paralysis, sudden cold spells, hallucinations of a girl standing in doorways, dreams of mismatched eyes staring through darkness. Psychologists called it inherited trauma. The families called it the witch eye curse. By the early 1900s, people refused to say her name. Children were warned never to wander near the river after dusk. Stories spread that she appeared to those who kept secrets, and Hawthorne had many. There were still no records of the orphanage experiments, no archives from the circle's doctrines, no surviving journals except the ones hidden under floorboards. Someone had erased history, but not memory. Because descendants of Hawthorne all reported seeing the same figure in their nightmares, a girl who hadn't aged, who stood perfectly still, whose eyes reflected light like polished glass. They said she wasn't haunting them. She was watching them. The most chilling account came from a former resident named Elizabeth Harper. In 1907, she recorded her experience in a letter found years later in an attic trunk. As a child, Elizabeth attended the Hawthorne schoolhouse. One winter morning, she and two classmates were cleaning the teacher's office when they found a loose board in the floor. Beneath it lay a small wooden box. Inside were 3 items: a silver cross, a girl's hair ribbon, a page torn from a church ledger. The ribbon was old, frayed at the edges. The cross matched the description of the one Annalise once held, but the ledger page was the disturbing part. It contained a handwritten line: "The child cannot be contained in one time." Elizabeth said that after touching the ribbon, she felt a cold pressure behind her eyes. That night she dreamed of a girl with 2 different, colored eyes standing at the foot of her bed. The girl said, "You shouldn't have found that." Elizabeth woke screaming. Her classmates who touched the box had the same dream. Within 6 months, all 3 families moved away, but Elizabeth claimed she saw the girl again decades later, reflected in a train window, still young, still quiet, as if she hadn't aged a day. In 1923, a historian named Franklin Moore attempted to locate Annalise's grave after hearing the rumors. He traveled to the overgrown cemetery behind the ruined chapel, hoping to find anything connected to the witch eyes legend. He was not prepared for what he found. The grave markers were rotted, scattered, some overturned. But in the far corner was a single plot with no stone, only a warped wooden post. Moore dug carefully, expecting remains. There were none. Instead, he unearthed a second chamber below the grave, a hollow cavity filled with strange markings. Circles, handprints, symbols resembling eyes. In the center was a blackened patch of soil, cold to the touch, even in the heat of July. Moore collected a sample. When he returned to his lodging, he found the jar shattered. The soil gone, he wrote in his journal, "Something wrong with the ground, something watching me." Moore left Hawthorne the next morning. He never published his findings. His journal was discovered in 1951 after his death, hidden behind a false wall in his study. The last sentence: "The grave is empty, but she is not gone." The most concrete evidence surfaced in 1934. A group of college students conducting folklore research visited Hawthorne, unaware of the town's reputation. While exploring the ruins of the orphanage, they discovered an old phonograph cylinder buried under debris. They sent it to their university for restoration. The recording is damaged, warped, but one phrase is unmistakable. A child's voice whispering, "I see you." The voice is soft, but unnatural, flat without breath, as if spoken by someone who didn't understand how to shape sound. Acoustic experts claimed it didn't match human vocal patterns. Students returned to Hawthorne to investigate further. They did not finish their research. One vanished, another withdrew from school, refusing to speak of the trip. The third was found wandering the woods miles away, barefoot, muttering her eyes were wrong. They were too old. The cylinder was locked away in the university archives and labeled restricted. It still sits there. No one plays it anymore. The last credible sighting occurred in 1948. An elderly farmer named Thomas Reed reported seeing a young girl standing in his barn at dusk. He assumed she was lost and approached with caution, but she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe visibly. When he stepped closer, the barn grew cold. His breath fogged the air. The girl lifted her head. One eye blue, one amber. Reed fell backward in terror. When he scrambled up, the girl was gone. He ran to the sheriff. The sheriff refused to file a report. Reed died the next year, but his son repeated his father's final warning. If you see her, don't look at her eyes. They remember you. After 1948, Hawthorne emptied out completely. Buildings collapsed. Nature reclaimed the land, but travelers still report strange flickers at the edge of the river. A small figure, standing perfectly still. Watching, modern researchers attempting to study the case keep encountering a strange roadblock. Every time a researcher digs too deeply into the history of Hawthorne, something inexplicable happens. Hard drives corrupt. Notes vanish. Recordings distort. One researcher mapped all the locations connected to Annalise. The plantation, the chapel, the orphanage, the river, the grave. When he plotted them on a map, he realized something chilling. They formed a perfect circle at the center of it, a small patch of woods where nothing grows. Photographs taken of the woods always develop with a blur in the center, a human-shaped blur. When overlaid with historical records, the outline matches the size of a 12-year-old girl. Researchers call it the witch eye radius. Locals refuse to go near it. New reports continue to surface. Campers hearing footsteps around their tents. Boaters seeing a figure standing on the riverbank. Photographs showing two small reflections hovering in darkness, blue, amber. Some say she's a ghost. Others say she's caught between moments, never aging, never dying, trapped by a ritual that failed. But those who study the case believe something far more disturbing. She didn't disappear because she was taken. She disappeared because she learned how to leave. They say Annalise is not a spirit wandering the world. She is a watcher, a being that moves through time the way others walk through rooms. She sees everything, secrets, sins, generations of buried guilt, and she never forgets a face. So who or what was Annalise? A cursed child, a victim of superstition, a symbol of America's buried sins, or something older? Something that sees through time, trauma, and the stories people tell to hide their cruelty. The circle feared her because she exposed corruption. Families feared her because she remembered what they tried to forget. The town feared her because she refused to age and die like a normal child. Maybe Annalise wasn't the monster. Maybe she was the mirror. A mirror reflecting everything Hawthorne tried to bury: the rituals, the abuse, the forgotten children, the silent chambers beneath the church. And a mirror never stops reflecting. So the story ends with a question that no historian can answer. When you look into darkness, what looks back? Some say that if you wander the woods near the old Hawthorne chapel, you might catch a glimpse of mismatched eyes watching from the shadows, waiting, remembering, seeing you, and if you do, turn away, because once she sees you, she never forgets.